Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Open Concept Podcast, where we are breaking down those unnecessary walls and barriers that stand in the way of greatness. Our guest today, all the way from Toronto, Teresa Vozza, is joining us here. So happy to have you. Teresa is a coach, an executive coach, has a huge amount of experience in leadership, has been featured on breakfast television, has been doing some writing for Business Insider, a number of other articles. Very excited to have you here to pick your brain. You also have a dog sitting with you in your office. We were chatting about that off air. I do as well. So if there's a little barking in the background, nobody pay too much attention to that. But it's a beautiful thing. Teresa, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm so happy to be here as well. It's cool to see you almost in the flesh across the screen, and looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, well, next time you're in Vancouver, I'm in Toronto. We'll have to do it in person.
Yeah, love it. Sounds good.
Teresa, for people that don't know who you are, like, give us a bit of a background of where you came from, how you got involved in, like, leadership specifically is sort of a weird term. Like, nobody is really born and then is just decides that they're going to be a leader. Like, there's usually a transition in, throughout life to a point where now people start defining you as a leader, and then you realize, maybe you're really going to do something about this and share what you have and what you can with the world. But where did that start for you in your early career, and how did you get into doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, great question. Sometimes I like to introduce myself as a recovering executive because that's kind of how I stepped into leadership. Is I spent, before starting my own show about 4.5 years ago, I was operating as a chief HR officer for a global company called Allianz. And I spent 22 years both in highly politicized organizational structures, very matrixed, where I learned really fast the art of having to influence across different geographies, across different functions, and it was never easy. And so part of that was because of the nature of the industries that I worked in, which were largely financial institutions who were global. And so with global companies come more global problems and complexity, because you have different layers to deal with, different cultures that you are also learning about as you lead. So part of my foray into leadership was I always had this nagging, this nagging urge to tell people how to do it differently. And what I mean by that is I spent so many years in organizations where I was responsible for putting people through leadership development training or leadership development workshops. And every time I attended any one of those workshops, I always felt like something was missing. And over time, I came to realize that what was really missing was the human element of leadership, the triggers, the things that get under your skin, the inability to be with conflict, the inability to give feedback, and everything that we learned didn't really cover off those really tricky areas in a way that I thought was meaningful or long lasting. And there's this theory in adult learning development, which is called spray and pray. And
Yeah.
with that, you may have heard of it, right? So you just spray a bunch of knowledge and you hope something is going to actually land and stick to your participants. And after so much development that I've done, nothing stuck. And I was on this quest to figure out, well, why didn't anything stick? And it's because they weren't asking the right questions. It was very out of the box type of training, very formulaic. And that's what led me to, a seed of a creative idea of my own to build leadership development combined with executive coaching, trauma-informed executive coaching, to help people understand why is it that certain people get under your skin? What is it about what they're saying that you're having a difficult time to accept? Because I would say over 70, 80% of problems within organizations today have stem to do with people and their relationships to one another and how they communicate and how they deal with conflict. But those aren't the topics that are getting talked about. So I try to really bring a human, non-jargon, no corporate buzzword approach to how I train and coach leaders today. And it resonates. People want real. They don't want canned responses. And that's kind of what led me down this building of a business 4.5 years ago, where I work with a number of different organizations, both global, both local, both mom and pop, to help bring some of that leadership language that resonates and moves the needle on how to work together in a way that drives performance without calling it high performance
Right.
and having it become just another buzzword.
These big organizations, I mean, you talk about this matrix and this complicated, geographically spread org structure that is, arguably a pretty uh, robust, ship to turn, right? If you need to, if there's a lot of people around, very like communication is not very fluid.
Yeah.
I imagine that the way of training and leadership, it is kind of canned, right? Because it's meant to be a
Sorry, I
like
just
cover a
lost you there for
broad
a sec.
spectrum for a lot of different people,
Hold on.
rather than smaller groups of individual people where maybe you have a little more dynamic ability to actually get personal because you're speaking to larger organizations, larger groups, larger
Uh-oh.
quantities of people,
Can you hear
and so that
me?
you're looking for something kind of of the over the
No.
top that just sort of targets pretty well everybody but doesn't actually resonate with anyone, right? It's sort of coaching for everybody, but it is this like
Yeah.
leadership for dummies manual that somebody wrote,
Yeah.
and as an HR person you're delivered that and said, hey, this is the playbook, follow this and you'll be good. But it does not work that way. It has zero impact, and I imagine that's what you were feeling.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I come from HR. That was my background. I was a HR professional. I get that you have to start somewhere. And so having programs and best practices, if you will, is very helpful. However, it's not until you're, you know, in the trenches. You have to understand the world of leaders and what they're up against. And that requires a lot of kind of personal one-to-one work, trying to mine for the real things that keep you up at night. And I think that's the big missing piece of leadership development is there's not that kind of true human touch to ask, hey, what is it that trips you up? I know you're saying it's quote unquote, the strategy is unclear, but what is it about the strategy being unclear that's actually causing a physical reaction for you? And how does that manifest when you're sitting across from a CEO or from a team who's looking at you like, they don't know what you're talking about? So it's really getting to almost somatic, like in the moment, what goes through your body when you're in that position and everyone's looking at you like, we don't know what you're talking about, Brandon. And so what gets activated, what gets triggered? And it's at that precise point that we can then say, okay, so what are you believing in that moment? What's happening in your body? Let's reframe it. Let's see what happens if we try a different approach, if we regulate the nervous system for 20 seconds, 5 seconds. It's those moments that I think really matter, that when you translate into practice at your very next quote unquote meeting or RFP, request for proposal, or bid, whatever the language of the business is, you can actually show up in a much more powerful way because you're in command of your internal state versus trying to remember a 5-point how to deal with pressure that you received in some workshop a couple of weeks ago. It doesn't work that way. It has to be felt and lived and embodied for it to then feel like, oh wow, like I really handled myself well in that bid because I was able to regulate in the moment and I figured it out.
Yeah, there was a book, one of my favorite books. It's called Seven. Was it Seven Forms of Communication?
Yeah,
Erwin McManus he's written an
yeah,
amazing book, and I read it. I've read it a number of times, and I keep going back to it because it's awesome, and it talks about communication. But one of the quotes that he has in it, and I've read it a number of times, and I'm going to butcher it here. It's longer than what I'm going to recite it, but basically, if there's no emotion to a story, anchored to a story or anchored to an action, then that is not going to happen. It is like the action that needs to be taken is not going to happen unless there is an emotion that's tied to it, either an emotion of extreme happiness and gratitude, maybe it's fear, maybe it's anger, but it has to be like in emotion. They're huge drivers
yeah,
for action and pivoting, right? That boat that's
yeah,
all of a sudden cruising in one direction, and it needs to go in the other direction, but there just isn't enough emotional strength to really like turn it where it is until something kind of like hits you, something kind of snaps,
yeah.
or and somebody's maybe spoken that into you, and finally it gets into your head and into your heart where you have enough strength to just like crank things 90 degrees, or maybe 3 degrees, but wherever you
Yeah,
need to go to
yeah.
start moving things in the direction that it needs to go.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, one of the things I always encourage executive leaders or leaders that I work with is, when we look at things like team, when we look at things like vision, when we look at things like, a strategy for the future, always connect with a story. So really connect people from a place of what you're building and what you're envisioning and how they can be a part of it. In some cases, bring some humor and lightness. In other cases, bring some inspiration. But whenever you are speaking in front of a crowd, because I do a lot of keynote speaking as well, in addition to my service, they don't remember any bullets. They remember how you enter a conversation and how you exit. And that entrance and that exit is often populated with emotion, story, sometimes a powerful quote, a powerful call to action. It doesn't even necessarily have to be charismatic. Like, you don't have to be a charismatic person to evoke emotion. You just need to, and this is something I think that when I think about leadership, is the power is in knowing which questions to ask. The power is in knowing when to pause and let people speak. The power is in just waiting long enough to create like a visceral reaction in who you're speaking with. So a lot of the work that I do, specifically with leaders, and my quote unquote target group is a lot of senior leaders, because that's the world I worked in, is really getting better at asking questions. And I always say, become a beautiful questioner. If you can become a beautiful questioner, you will impact the people on your team. And so the next thing they say is, but how do I do that? Okay, well, here's where I can help you. Let's take a scenario. What do you have coming up? Do you have a board meeting coming up? Great. Let's use that as practice. How do you want to open up and enter that board meeting? And so we'll just start with like real world practical things that are part of their everyday reality, not a hypothetical, not a case study, although those can be helpful, but not really starting there. No, what's real and alive in your world today that if you could make an impact, and I could help you make that impact by how you enter that room, what story you use, and how you might exit, and what to do in the in between when you get triggered, because we all get triggered. I think that is power. I think
Real quick before we get back to the show, if you have heard anything on this podcast that has resonated with you, or if it's helped you in any way, appreciate more than anything in the world if you could go hit that subscribe button or leave us a review. It helps us tremendously. I want to go back to being able to continue to serve and do more and more and help out and get bigger and bigger guests on, better and better. The only way that I can do that is with your help. I'm so honored to be here. Let's get back to the show. Appreciate you. Have a wonderful day.
That's powerful leadership.
Well, it also allows for quick, real wins, right? Where people can quickly see the results of what they're working on, and they can see the impact of what it is, the new skills that they have or the new framework that they're working through in real time. And they're going to get really quick feedback, and that's going to start to really tell them a lot about how they're showing up, the questions that they're asking, how they're delivering it, their body language, all that stuff, because it isn't theoretical. It is happening in real time.
Yeah. And I think one of people's most fundamental needs, I think it was Robert Waldinger who, I don't know if I said his last name correctly, but I think he's a happiness researcher. One of the things he said is one of the most fundamental needs people have, and it doesn't matter if this is in an executive boardroom or even at home, is they want to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
And so so what does it mean to be seen? It means people want to be asked questions. They want you to be curious about them. And I see this no differently when you're making a bid for business or when you are making a bid for attention at home. It's, what are the questions you can ask of the people on the other side that's going to help them feel like their needs are being seen, that what keeps them up at night is being validated, and that you'll be able to help them with authenticity, with a genuine offer to help. I think once we do that, we often get the outcomes that we're looking for, not just in business, but I think also just in life. And if I translate that to leadership, it's, when people come to me and say, I'm having difficulties leading my team, or I'm having difficulties leading my company, or I can't get everyone on board, the first person I ask a lot of questions of is them. It's the CEO, it's the president, it's the managing director, whatever the title may be. It's not the team. It's like, what is happening within you that we may need to be paying attention to? And what does this frustration cost you? What does it cost your business? We spend a lot of time on you first before we go to team, before we go to business. It's like, I see it as a pyramid, and it's like leading self is the bottom, right? Then it's leading team, and then it's leading self, team, and then business. If you get those three right, you have the makings of great leadership.
And I think where a lot of people in leadership positions, they, when they're trying to communicate or with their team, and maybe it's people that are on the front line that are, they're probably a little dislocated from the reality of what's going on, and maybe they're a little disconnected to what's going on in their world. So, once a quarter or once a month, depending on the size of the organization, maybe once a week, I don't know, but they'll walk up and maybe have this lighthearted conversation of, hey, how was the weekend? Oh, hey, at least it's not raining, right? Like these little kind of conversations that just don't go anywhere. You're like, yeah, obviously it's not raining. No, my weekend was fine. Like, what else? But how would you tell somebody that's maybe struggling to communicate with their team, if they're, just to get past some of these surface level questions that are really not doing anything other than taking up time? Because that's it. Like neither of you really want to answer that into the level. Like the default answer is, I was fine. How about you? Oh yeah, I was pretty good. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, see you later. Right. But then it's not really communicating. It's talking without hearing. It's talking without asking. It's talking without feeling. Like that's it. In my world, that is not communicating. But what are the types of things that if somebody maybe is a little disconnected, they are trying to communicate better at another depth, what would that look like? Maybe somebody that's they're the owner of the company. They're pretty used to like sitting in the office. They're kind of getting out there. They're feeling a little nervous. Do these people, actually want to hear from me? Or you're getting on stage and you're talking and you're thinking in your head, do these people actually want to hear what I have to say? But what would some of the opening conversations, softening questions that would actually incite real conversation, real communication look like
Yeah,
to you?
I love this question so much. It reminds me of a client I just spoke with a couple hours ago, and she works for a large construction company out of the U.S. and she's new to the role. And one of the things she's noticed is that the president um, knows so much about everyone that works there. And one of the things that she just noticed right away was that he always asked about their children, or he
Mm,
was aware that someone had gone into the hospital, or he was aware that someone had a pickleball tournament that same weekend. And she talked about how much that meant to her because she knew she was walking into an environment where people actually cared about them as a human versus just them as a quote unquote worker. So my answer to your question is really first and foremost, for those who have never done it before, I would start with being very specific. So it's like asking very general questions doesn't invite dialogue. Dialogue is created by specificity, if I can say that word right, being specific. So, you go up to someone, they're in the lunchroom, hey, Brandon, how's your weekend? What did you do specifically? I'm looking for ideas of things to do this weekend. What can you tell me that you've done that's fun? And sometimes that could get the conversation started. For someone who has maybe a little bit more knowledge of the person, but not a lot, may know they have a dog or something and they have a dog. So you find a point of commonality and you say, oh, the funniest thing happened with my dog this weekend, and that could lead to a conversation. But that second example requires that someone has a little bit of information about the person rather than just going in with absolutely nothing. The other thing I would say is I think every leader should spend as much have one-to-one time with at the very least with their direct reports. I understand you're not going to be able to have it if you have a crew of 100 people and so on. Although there's other ways to get to that too. But at the very least with your direct reports, like this is where you can bring in a little bit of rigor. Doesn't have to be a script, doesn't have to be a fancy template, although we can provide those. To just have ready-made questions like, tell me what's most important to you right now. Tell me a little bit about, your home life, your family life. I've realized I've been leading you for so long and I haven't asked you these questions, and I'd like to change that. I'd like to get to know you more as a person. And even just that can just start to flip the switch. And then once you do that, notice people. Remember some teeny tiny details. I had a CEO who used to have a pad of paper beside him. And when he had one-to-ones, he would jot down afterwards, like a 5-minute download. Sally, mother's in the hospital. Bob, just had a new baby. So he would just to help remind himself. But I think that level of intentionality is really important. And I would say if you've never done it at all yet, start with even just that one-to-one saying, you know what, I've realized I have worked here for this long and I haven't asked you a lot about your home life. I want to know more. I'd like you to share with me a couple of things that are important to you, and just see how they open up. It might be a little uncomfortable at first, especially if they're not used to it. They're like, what?
yeah.
So you have to kind of preface that. But if not, then go to plan B. We both have these two things in common. Hey, have you played any pickleball lately? I haven't gone out the track in a while. And so just, look for ways to see what's in common with the both of you. And if not, just be really intentional and say, hey, no, I'd really like to get to know you better than I have. Kind of feel remiss that I haven't asked you many questions about like your wife or your kids or what you do. Tell me a little bit about what your weekends look like. Something like that.
I love it, but specificity, right,
Oh,
is important. Even when you're networking and meeting people that are
yeah,
new, right? It's like, oh yeah, the same thing. You go out like, yeah, how was the weekend? Oh yeah, good. How was yours? Yeah, it was good.
yeah,
Cool. How's business? It's like,
yeah,
yeah, it's pretty good.
yeah,
Cool. How about you? Yeah, no, same thing. Yeah, no, we're doing our thing.
yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll see you later. I'm just gonna go over to the
Gather.
canapes and the table over there and get some snacks. But yeah, that the specific questions, right? It engages specific answers, which allows you to dive deeper into that conversation. And now you know a little bit more about that person. They know a little bit more about you. It brings you together. It magnifies commonalities, and essentially that's really what you want to you want to understand is what how to where at what level can we actually meet to communicate on, because if you're trying to communicate with people on any sort of level, then you need to be on that same level.
Mm.
If you're on one level up here, someone's on another level over here, someone's on another level over here, and you're trying to get a word across, those words are not going to resonate or really be heard until you guys get on that same wavelength.
Yeah. Yeah, and one other thing I'll mention too, I think it's worth mentioning, is that I also think it's important you know, for those leaders who've had, a taste of success and maybe at that higher level than maybe some of the other people within their companies, is, to be really disarming and to understand that. And again, I think human behavior shows this too, is that a lot of leaders who are maybe not, say, for example, if I'm a director and you're a CEO, there may be a healthy level of intimidation because you're the boss, you're at a higher level. And so, one of the things I always urge CEOs specifically and presidents and more senior executives to really take a note of is, how are you making it comfortable for those people who are not at the same level of you? Are you using disarming language?
Mm.
Are you refraining from corporate buzzwords? Are you relaxed in their presence and asking about something more casual? I think that really being just attentional about how your authority shows up in a room is also really important. And I think, we can all remember probably someone we've worked for where they were billionaires or millionaires, but they made you feel so important in their presence because that wasn't what was in the room when they were with you. So whatever you can do to be disarming and casual and invite people into your world, or you invite yourself into theirs, I think goes a long way to building high trust cultures within companies as well.
Yeah, and with clients, right? Because
Oh, yeah.
a very common example that I see, we're in the trades and home service business world, and that's where we spend a lot of
Yeah.
time. And one of the things that I know is technicians, right? They're really good at what they do. They come in, they have the skills, they understand what to do with their hands, how things are built, they know it inside and out, but they want to just spew all of that information to somebody that has no idea what they're talking about. So even in our operating procedures, and I'll use this as an example from our world, it talks about using that kind of language. And so rather than, if you're walking a client through a home and you say, well, you don't look at them and say, well, we need to put R20 insulation in your wall. It's like, no, okay, you step back a little bit and you say, well, actually, like right now, right, the BC building code where we are is, it used to be that we would have R14 insulation in a wall, which actually it used to be able to fit in a 2x4 wall system, but now they've increased the code to fit a thicker bat of insulation, which means that we actually need to make the walls a bit thicker because your home is now going to be warmer, and it's
Mhm.
going to be more preventative for these cases. But it's really being able to change that, get rid of that technical language that probably isn't going to resonate with most people if they're not there, and getting out of this mindset that, like, yes, you are a professional, but the ability to communicate on a fourth grade level really shows that you know what you're talking about. Because if you do just default to using language that you've read in a book, or language that you hear or what you understand it, to look like because you happen to be in that industry, tells me that you actually don't really understand it at the depth that you need to, and certainly not in a way that's going to get you as far as you need it to get you.
Yeah, you're right. And you mentioned explain things almost like you're speaking to a fourth grader, and it's no different in your world than it is in some of the, corporate worlds that I've come from and operate from. And I think the big piece there is brevity.
Mhm.
And I would say like brevity over bravado. You do not need to go on and on about specific topics or items. Always understand your audience. And in fact, this is actually one of probably the most common um, leadership skills that I get approached with at that VP level, at that senior level, is I talk a lot, or I over explain, or I use too many words, or I use big words. And we call it in our world, your executive presence or executive polish. But really, it's just about your ability to speak concisely and use as few words as possible. And wherever you can, use an example so that people can understand what it is that you're explaining. And I see that we hide behind words, like especially leaders who are driven by ego. They hide behind words, they hide behind lengthy explanations. And one of the first things I try to take back and extract is how can you say that in way less words, take out all these fancy filler words, and just extract the most important salient point from what it is you want to get across at a board or a potential client. Speak to them like a human and they will respond to you in kind. And so I think that tendency to over explain is often born of insecurity and just the need to like keep talking to get rid of the nerves, or keep talking so that you can eventually believe what you're saying yourself. So taking them back, relaxing, saying it in few words, that's really important training.
I don't watch much television. We're talking, I have a 4.5-year-old daughter
Mhm.
and an 8-month-year-old daughter and one television in the house. So anytime the TV goes on, it's automatically defaulted to like whatever my
Yeah,
oldest wants to
yeah,
watch. She thinks it's her television, and I go to bed about the same time that they
yeah,
do. So I don't get to watch much television. But over the last week, it's been the household. It's been a little sick and late nights and everything. So I've been up, and I turned on Netflix and I watched Wyatt Earp.
hmm,
It came on Netflix, and as I was watching this over the course of, I don't know, 4 or 5 nights, 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there. It's a long movie,
hmm,
but it was interesting. What I picked up from that movie is exactly what you're talking about now. I listened to all the words that this character, Kevin Costner, what he was saying, and he became a very clear leader in everything that he did. But very few words, but they were very precise. It got the point across. There wasn't a lot of fillers, and I watched that and I couldn't
yeah,
help but think to myself, how can I be a little more Wyatt Earp?
yeah,
Maybe a little less like gunny and
yeah,
shooty down with people, but how can I be a little more like that? And I know, I understand it's scripted, it's a Hollywood movie, but the it was a well written character, and just the ability to get the point across in very few words and
yeah,
have that kind of impact on that many people
yeah.
by saying very little is a skill that most people will never ever develop.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that last part, because by no means do I want to convey to your listeners or to yourself that it's easy, because it's not. I too, I'm an Italian, and we use a lot of words and we use a lot of hands, and just from growing up, I too have had to condition. I was conditioned from a very young age to just be very passionate, very loud, lots of hands, lots of expression. And don't get me wrong, I do not want to subdue that from a place of like lack. However, what I've learned over time is that if I want to speak so that people will listen, the best thing I've ever learned how to do is to speak using fewer words. And it is a practice and it is a skill that I think we have for our lifetime. However, when we have those moments and sometimes large expanses of moments where we can do it, it's very powerful. One thing I'll share just by way as an example is as part of being an executive coach. I don't know how many people know this, but there's coaching and then there's accredited coaching. And to be an accredited coach, you have to go through skill training and you have to go through a federation called International Coach Federation. And one of the things that is a core competency, which they call a core skill, is your ability to ask short, concise questions. Because when you are on a coaching call with a leader or with anyone really, you lose the other person the longer your sentences go on. And people's attention spans are so short. And so, if we can ask a question in 5 words or less, fantastic. 8, pretty good. Over 10, probably a bit too long. So we've really had to hone the art of when across from someone that we are helping to ask specific, pointed, open-ended questions that allow the other person to explore their inner world and their external world with the freedom of having the space to do so. And so that training, I think, would benefit a lot of leaders today, is to know how to do that.
Let's talk about trauma for a minute, because you mentioned earlier in our conversation leading executives and CEOs and anybody in a business that you may be working with and coaching, finding, working with them through trauma or triggers. And you mentioned, by asking questions that might be the real question that needs to be answered, was what I picked up from that. Are there, people might come to you with a scenario that, they say, hey, this is the problem. This is what I'm trying to solve. This is the issue. And right away, there's signs that that like a red flag kind of pops up, that that this isn't the real question that they need to answer. So that's sort of part one. How often do you see that come up? And then once you hit that nerve and you ask those questions, you dig a little deeper and you find that question that really needs to be answered, you hit that trigger. Are there true signs that you can see in somebody where you're like, all right, I'm in the pocket now is business, now we can start actually doing some work? Is it little eye twitches? Is it uncomfortable body motions? Is it a change in pitch, in voice? Is it shifting in the chair? But there's got to be a sign where really, like, if you are digging to find that question, where there's maybe a long pause. All right, now we're going to start to get some traction. Now I can start helping you.
Yeah. I'll answer your first question first. Do people come to me with a quote unquote business issue and then soon you find out that there's probably a deeper issue underneath? And does that happen often? Yes. I would say it happens very often. And part of that is, there's an expression we use in trauma-informed coaching called shaping forces. And so we do a lot of work in understanding the forces that have shaped us as children, as adults, as humans, as individuals. So one of the things that I think is really important is, number one, setting the context. So before you work with anybody, you do share with them that you are trauma informed and that as part of that training, we listen for cues and patterns and so on. So you may at times hear me say, "Hey, that may sound like X. Can we go there for a moment?" The cues I listen for when I suspect there may be deeper issues at work. Some of the things you mentioned are accurate. I think, your body, your somatics carries a lot. So, for example, it could be with, sometimes I see with women very crouched down, like very lean forward. Um, Sometimes with men, specifically, I'll see looking away, the inability to make eye contact. Other times it's, frequent shifting in their seats. I mean, I shift too. I have that nature myself, but we're talking very overt shifting, pulling the chair back sometimes, putting their body language this way as opposed to straight on. Um, which is one of the things that actually came from marriage therapy. Actually, John Gottman, one of the renowned marriage
I'm
therapists,
familiar with John Gottman. Yeah.
yeah, has talked a lot about, straight on when you're communicating with people. If you're unable to do that and you're like this, it's usually a sign of an away from cut off conditioning. So yeah, we do look for those physical cues, but more than their body language, I can also tell from the patterns of the content of what we're talking about. So if I hear excessive blame, if I hear excessive victimization, if I see or hear excessive shame-based type of language, like, for example, why am I so stupid? I should have known that. Or I just delivered a big pitch and I bombed. Like this always happens to me. I come into the meeting and I freeze and I can't, I can't do it right. That usually lends itself to me asking further questions around what was going on with you in the moment that it was delivered. What did you notice in your body? When else has that occurred? Um, and sometimes, and because I'm not a therapist, we have to be very careful that we don't ride that line. So what we do as trauma informed coaches is we provide the language, we provide the terminology that may be helpful to them, that psychological, we call it psychoeducational insight. We are able to provide that. We are also able to provide somatic experiencing techniques, so getting into your body. And we also have the ability to say, and with the client's permission, let's stop here. At this point, we may want to consider further work with a trained therapist. But oftentimes, the clients that come to me, they've done the therapy. They're not necessarily looking for therapists. They may be aware of their triggers, and now they're at the point where, like, no, I see them. I just need to help with what to do when they come on and how I know that it's about to surface. And that's where the somatic work really comes into effect. Because if you can learn to really get clear on what your body is signaling, you have a clue. You have what we call a pattern interrupt. It's like, my shoulders are scrunched up. That's a pattern. I can interrupt that. Even in this meeting with you and I, Brandon, if I feel anxious, you won't even know it, but I could have like my hand on my belly and just do a quick belly breathe just to calm my system. Or what we do is another process called melt. My shoulders are up here, just melt. Like Teresa, just melt, just go back. And that too sends a message to the brain. You're safe. You're okay. So there's lots of different things that we can do that have been really helpful for leaders, especially in high stake, high pressure moments. So in your world, it might be like bids and proposals when you're waiting for things. That would be the same for my world as well. But also high stake presentations, high conflict, like a client de-escalation that you have to do, delivering bad news that something's going to be way over budget, or there's so many scenarios that this stuff comes up that I work with with my clients on.
There's got to be a real difference in understanding when to use different emotions and tonality in conversations, right? Because as a leader, you can't just be straight toned, monotone, or like, overly excited all, frantic all the time. But you need to know how to dig into different emotions and understand when to use them, at what frequencies, how often, in what use cases, right? If you're, walking onto in our case, maybe it's a job site, maybe it's a meeting, maybe it's a talk to high school kids versus a talk to business executives. Like, you need to know to understand your audience, who it is that you're speaking to, and what kind of energy to show up with. But how would you define, I guess, if you're walking into a scenario, how do you read the room right away?
Yeah.
Because you need to, you walk into a situation where all of a sudden, like, people are fighting, people are shouting. Do you need to then realize, all right, this is a moment to, like, yell and shout, and I just need to, like, get in front of this and get the attention and get my word across in a very direct, loud way, versus sitting back and talking to them more comfortably and just saying, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? Hey, let's talk about what just happened. If somebody's
Yeah.
totally redlining up here, that ability to, like, pull them aside and have a calm conversation. Hey, how else could we look at this type of scenario? That type of thing is just going to piss that person off. So you need to know when to jump back and forth
Yeah.
between these areas. And so if you were to walk into a scenario where you were, and especially coming from the HR world, you walk into this situation all the time. You're dealing with people that have conflict, or teams that have conflict, or businesses and partnerships that have conflict. But understanding, when to use different emotions, when to use these questions, how does that come up for you? How do you really start to read the room and intuitively know what needs to be done?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing I'll say is those of us who have also experienced our own trauma story, or have had, whether it's a big T trauma, like something huge and adverse, or just a series of small things that have happened, there's something called hypervigilance, which is probably a term you've heard, that for me myself has become something that I've been highly attuned to. So from a very young age, having grown up in, very violent, dysfunctional home myself, I became quickly attuned to moods. I became quickly attuned to what was coming in the room, whether it was going to be angry, whether it was going to be okay, whether it was going to yell, whether it was going to do something, far worse. And so what happens when you become attuned to different environments, different climates, in terms like personality climates, is you develop almost like another, almost like a sixth sense of being able to intuit and read the room. So that's in some ways become a bit of my superpower, having, something that came from something really hard, but also something that has also enabled me to be quite successful in my executive career, and now in my business. So I think first and foremost is, I'll answer from the frame about how I know, but then how others might be able to start reading it. Um, for myself, because I have that attuned sense, I know I can pick up pretty quickly if tensions have arisen so far, or if someone's way up here and another person's like way down here. My only job is to come in there and be a stabilizing force. It's not to tell anybody to calm down, because that never works.
It doesn't? That's weird.
No, it never works.
Note to self. All right, never use
Yeah,
that with my
calm
wife.
down
I'm just
never
kidding.
works.
Yeah.
Um, but what does work is, hold up. Let's take a timeout. Hey, hey, hey. Okay, can we all just take a timeout for a moment? Gary, I can see you're really angry. I understand your perspective. Let's give it 10 seconds. Rob, you're not saying much. I want to hear you out, but let's take a minute. Let's take a breath. And that pause of just de-escalating what it does is it just stops the fire. It stops like the fire from going up here, and the person who's maybe more demure and is actually very threatened by this outburst also has a chance to regulate. And so oftentimes I even do this with my family. If I see sometimes that my husband's starting to go red, and he doesn't in that way, but If he did, it's like, hey, can we just take a time out here? Because I can tell you're like at a 9, and Connor, my son over here, is at a 3.
Yeah.
Right. So like, let's just take a time out. And that works really well for our family. But in the business setting or in the corporate setting, I think the first and foremost is your job is not to go in and fix it. Your job is just to go in and stabilize and to get to a place of what I like to call neutrality. And part of that is just stepping in and saying, hey, everyone, I can see everyone's really excited right now. There's a lot of emotion in the room. I'm going to ask us to take just a 10-second timeout. Gary, I can see you're really validate first. Like, don't tell him to calm down. Validate. I can see you're really upset. Okay, we'll have a chance to go through what's on your mind, but take a minute. So and so over here, depending on who it is, if they're not speaking, I want to hear from you too. But let's take a minute.
Great tools.
Yeah,
like just the timeout versus the calm down.
Just practical, feel it out. And then after that time has passed and say, okay, so there's a lot of emotion in the room. Here's what's going to happen. Gary, I'm going to give you a minute. You have the floor. Tell me what's the pain point you're experiencing and what's the cost to you. So person over here, no, you're just going to listen, right? So, I keep going back to Gottman principles because I learned so much from him. But that's part of what we bring into the corporate world too. And what we do in trauma-informed coaching is like, your job is not to fix. Your job is just to stabilize, get them back to safety. Because they're feeling unsafe right now. People who are angry feel just as unsafe as people who are not saying a word. It just looks different.
Yeah, it can harness a lot of resentment, and resentment can't.
This episode is sponsored by New Vision Projects, and everybody has heard the horror stories that happen. They have a friend of a friend or a neighbor that's been renovating for years on end, or they've been building a home and it just hasn't gone the way that it needed to go. Budgets are blown through the roof, timelines, forget about them. New Vision Projects has an incredibly strong track record for over 15 years of working with customers, serving them at the highest level. If you are considering building or renovating, check them out on Instagram at New Vision Projects or at newvisionprojects.com. Building the homes you want with the confidence you need. New Vision has you covered. Let them show you why they're different. Back to the show.
And really drive cancer in a company if team members are resenting other team members, or they're resenting their leader, whatever that may look like. But generally, I find resentment really is unspoken or misaligned expectations, right, of outcomes. So, I had a quick story. I do a framework we have a company team meeting every Monday, and every 2 weeks I'll do a framework that I sketch out and we go over. And this week, just this past Monday, they're very basic. I can't draw worth a damn, but it gets the point across, hopefully in the way that I'm hoping it's going to land. But essentially it was, I created a story, right? And this story was a few sentences. It was about this man. He was sitting on a bench. He had a bright feathered bird in his palm that he was petting, and a tear was running down his weathered skin. And a well-dressed woman walked by the bench and smiled at him. It was just open-ended. And went through all of our team, gave them a few minutes to write down what they believed happened, or what this story looked like, or what had gone on to create this scene right now. And what was wild was it was all very different answers. There was answers of, heartbreak, right? The man's woman passed away. There was an answer of, this man had been very hungry, very poor for a long time and won the lottery. There was an answer of this bird was in a cage and it was his best friend, but he realized because it was a bright bird that it was supposed to be a caged bird, but he didn't want to see it in the cage, and now he was having to let it go and free it. And all this stuff started coming up because of this one little story. And the idea is, us as humans, when I drew a little stick person looking through a prism, and on the other side of that prism are different outcomes. And the way that we see based on our experiences in that prism is really going to shoot our, how we see our perspective and how we make up that story through all of these different pieces of glass to get to the story that we create in our head. And just by seeing that all of these stories are very, very different, given the exact same neutral context, what goes through people's minds and where that goes to, where it leads them to this outcome is always very different. And if you believe one outcome is 100% true, then that must mean that somebody else's understanding of that is 100% wrong. And trying to really understand that everybody does have different they see things differently based on their experiences, their environment, what they had for breakfast that day. Are they exercising? Are they not exercising? Are they reading books? Have they just read a book? Do they read nonfiction? Do they only read fiction? All of these things will really start to define what they start to see. And the question to them is, after we understand this, asking them two questions. What else? Right? What else being, what else could have possibly happened to get to this point? And what now? Right? And what now? So what are we going to choose to do if we're going to be communicating with somebody else, like understanding that there may be a different perspective to this? And that was something that we've done. And I think, when you're talking about speaking with people and really trying to get on the same level as them, is I think if you truly do understand somebody, you can't hate them.
Yeah.
It's impossible to hate them. It's impossible to sure, you can be frustrated and angry and whatever, but if you can get to a point where you understand, then that is key. And that's really where you can start now making some collective ground together.
I love that story, and thanks for sharing. It's a great, great example. And it makes me think of this one exercise that I sometimes do live when I'm, in front of groups that I'll share with you that could be helpful, and you could steal it for your next town hall. But we call this perceptual positions, and it's actually a exercise and practice from neuro-linguistic programming. And that was another part of my coaching certification that I did many years ago, but I still use this with companies today, where you have three people, and it's almost like you're sitting in a chair, a physical chair, in three different spots of a room, and you're taking an issue that has been perplexing the company or the product department or whoever it might be. And you have each person, so someone from product, someone from sales, maybe someone from customer service, all share their perspective of the issue at hand, their perception, and then we ask them to rotate chairs. So now the product person goes and sits in the salesperson's chair, and from that vantage point, what would you be concerned about as it relates to this problem from a sales perspective? What might they be thinking? And then they share the perception of the salesperson. And then the same thing, we go around the three chairs, and it's amazing what happens because it opens the door to perspective-based thinking. It's like there's your perspective, and then there's the other person's perspective, and potentially others. You could have more than three chairs, but that would make for a very long exercise. So we stick with three. And that has really yielded some aha moments for teams who are stuck in a way of thinking that's very linear or very siloed and focused on one vantage point being the way. So your exercise gets to the same point, but it can be kind of fun because you're actually in chairs and you're moving around and people start to laugh, and it can be a really powerful one.
That type of thing, how would you use that at home with maybe your significant other? Because I know how I talk to my employees is not how I can talk to my wife.
Yeah.
Right? You talk about reading a room and disarming but I know when I go in there, and if there's some sort of conflict or the kids have been driving her nuts and I get home and she's just had a day, For me to put on my CEO hat and treat this situation like I'm treating an employee,
I
she
know.
knows that, right? And it is not the method to use, right? All these things that we're talking about, it's just really, I think she just wants, like, to back to our early conversation, what you're saying, what do people really want is they want to be seen.
Yeah, and you know
More
what?
than anything.
That's a great point. And I always say to people, like, start where you are and start where people are. So I'm introducing tools and strategies that can, yes, for sure, be used both at home and at work. However, choose your timing, and also know that certain tools are not meant to be used at certain times. So seasonality matters, the environment matters, the timing matters. And so sometimes the perceptual position or the perspective is, what do you most need from me right now?
Yeah.
Some space? Do you need to just like download for around how hard the day was? What do you most need? And then like that could be easy. And if that sounds too, oh, Brandon, you must have read something from a book, then like make it really just natural. Say, hey, I'm going to give you some space. Is that work for you? And then let's talk a bit later. Just make it really casual and Brandon like, as opposed to template like. I'm always
Yeah, there was well, I was telling my oldest daughter, we were down in the hospital all weekend, and she's just recovering from pneumonia.
yeah.
And the conversation, came up. She was like, I don't know, should we take her to the hospital because she's like, we have this medication. I don't know if we should go because we have the youngest one
Yeah.
and do this, but what do you think? And like, I'm not gonna say, hey, let's swat it out, baby. Let's like,
Yeah.
let's get the whiteboard out and like
Oh,
work through a framework here so we can come up with a decision. It's just like, no, I get it. What does your heart tell you? All right,
yeah,
let's do that.
beautiful.
I'm here to support and do whatever we
Yeah,
can.
that's beautiful. Or my husband, he's really good. He'll say to me sometimes, tell me what you need right now. Do you want to go upstairs and have a bath? Do you want to like tell me what it is? And he knows, because my work is so client centric, that most of the times what I need is peace. So just like I'm a extroverted introvert. Like I can go on stages, I can do these things, and then I'm going to go right upstairs and I'm going to have a bath and I'm going to read a book probably, and just be in solitude. So knowing what they need, and sometimes that question is a great question even to pose at work. Tell me what you most need right now. Do you want advice, or do you want to just kind of download what your issue is? Sometimes people don't want to be told what to do. They just want to complain and vent. Although there's boundaries around that I think need to be in place too. But sometimes, like, do you want advice, or do you want to just kind of share that you're frustrated? Tell me what you
Yeah,
need. Yeah.
people that know me would tell you that I'm an extrovert. Myself, who knows myself better than anybody else, will 100% tell you that I'm an introvert with extroverted tendencies.
Me too. 1,000%. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. 1,000%.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Teresa, if people want to connect with you, where the heck can they find you? How do they do that?
Yeah, it was super easy. I on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. That's my primary platform. You can find me on Instagram at Teresa Vozza Official. And you can also find me on my website, Teresa at crucibleleader.ca, or actually just www.crucibleleader.ca.
I love it. Well, hey, thank you so much for being here. I know it's getting a little late. You're a few hours ahead in time zones,
All good.
but it's been a tremendous to have you on, and really, truly appreciate your time here today.
Oh, thanks, Brandon. I had a lot of fun. That was such an easy, fluid conversation, my very favorite kind. So thank you.
I love it. And to all our listeners that are out there and still with us, as always, I'm here rooting for you to win. And until next time, stay blessed. Rock and roll. Peace. See ya.